snow was coming down so hard it erased the skyline. Lake Michigan was a wall of white, and downtown Chicago felt like a ghost town swallowed by its own breath. Inside a lone diner near Millennium Park, neon lights flickered against fogged glass, the only pulse of color in a night gone colorless. That's where the billionaire sat. Rowan Keats, the man who could move entire markets with a single email, stirred his black coffee without tasting it. He looked every bit the man who owned half the skyline and none of the warmth beneath it. But that night, the city decided to test what was left of his heart. If you've ever believed one act of kindness could change a life, drop a comment below. Because by the end of this story, you'll see that even a billionaire can be brought to his knees by 6 trembling words. The bell over the diner door jangled against the wind. Heads turned. The storm shoved in a small figure, a girl no older than 9, wrapped in a coat too thin to be useful. Her mittens were mismatched, her shoes soaked through her hair, matted with snow. She stood at the door, blinking under the buzzing light, as if she had stepped into another world and wasn't sure she was allowed to stay. The waitress hesitated, her kindness wrestling with company policy. A couple of truckers went quiet. The only sound was the wind shrieking outside and the hiss of the coffee machine. The girl stepped forward, clutching a torn canvas bag to her chest. Her voice cracked, small but steady. "Please, sir," she said, eyes fixed on Rowan's table. "1 bowl of noodles. I can wash dishes." The words landed like a verdict in a silent courtroom. Rowan looked up. For years he'd been called ruthless, efficient, heartless. People said his smile could freeze a room. He'd built his empire on control, on never reacting. But there was something about that child, her defiant dignity wrapped in shivers, that made control feel like cowardice. The waitress started to speak something about rules, about closing time, but Rowan lifted a hand. "She'll eat," he said, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "Bring her noodles and make it hot." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't do spontaneous, he didn't do strangers. Yet, watching the girl slide onto the booth's edge, careful not to drip snow on the vinyl, he felt something shift inside him, a small, painful thaw. She sat perfectly still, her hands in her lap, her eyes darting to the steaming mugs on other tables. The waitress placed the bowl in front of her, steam curling upward like mercy made visible. The girl whispered, "Thank you," not out of habit, but reverence. Rowan watched her eat, not like a child indulging, but like someone negotiating with survival, measured, deliberate, grateful. Each bite was half prayer, half apology. He realized his chest hurt, and it took him a moment to name the feeling, guilt. Outside, the blizzard clawed at the windows. Inside, something gentler began. He found himself asking questions he didn't need the answers to. Where were her parents? Why was she out here? How long had she been hungry enough to ask? He caught himself before he spoke. He'd spent his life avoiding complications. But that instinct, the one that had made him untouchable, suddenly felt hollow. The waitress poured him another coffee, but he didn't drink it. He was watching her hands shake around the chopsticks. She paused halfway through the bowl, as if embarrassed by her own hunger. "You can finish," he said. His voice softened without permission. The girl glanced up. Her eyes were dark and deep in a way that didn't belong to children. "Thank you, sir," she said again, and this time the words cracked like glass. Rowan leaned back, hearing the storm rage outside. He'd been through worse storms, financial, political, emotional, but none that made him feel this exposed. Somewhere deep inside, the version of himself that once believed in love stirred, blinking at the light. He glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. His driver had texted twice, waiting in the storm. His meeting in New York would start in 9 hours. His schedule didn't have room for this. But the truth hit him. He didn't want this night to end. The girl finished the soup and placed her spoon down gently, as if not to disturb the silence. Rowan studied her, noticing the red marks on her wrists, the bruise near her collarbone. He felt heat crawl into his chest, a fury that surprised him. Not pity, but anger at a world that left children to beg for noodles in a city worth billions. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena Morales." He nodded. "I'm Rowan." She blinked, unsure whether that was something she should know. He signaled to the waitress again. "A cup of warm milk," he said, "and a sandwich to go." The waitress brought the milk first. Lena wrapped both hands around the cup, holding it like it contained safety itself. Her shoulders eased a little. She sipped slowly, her lashes fluttering closed with each swallow. Rowan sat back, studying the reflection in the window. The snowstorm outside, the child opposite him and himself, split between two worlds. One where control was currency and one where compassion was rebellion. He didn't know it yet, but this was the night the ledger of his life would be rewritten. When she finally looked up, her eyes met his, not pleading, not expecting, just searching for proof that kindness still existed. And he, for once, didn't look away. Somewhere in that silent diner, between the smell of coffee and the howl of winter, a man who had everything met the one thing he didn't know: he needed a reason to stay. If you think that's where the story ends, it isn't. What happens after this bowl of noodles will test everything he's ever believed about power, family, and the price of being human. Stay with me, because what he does next will change more than one life. The hotel lobby was nearly empty when they arrived. Outside, snow still came down like it was trying to erase the city. Inside, everything gleamed brass marble, quiet money. The peninsula Chicago had always been Rowan Keats's kind of refuge, predictable, polished, discreet. But tonight, he wasn't checking in for solitude. He was carrying it. A small girl with trembling shoulders and eyes that kept flinching toward the floor followed 2 steps behind him. The concierge recognized him immediately, but said nothing, just handed over a key card with the kind of respect reserved for men who signed 6-figure tips. Still, there was a flicker of curiosity. A child with the city's most guarded billionaire wasn't standard company. Rowan didn't explain. He wasn't sure he could. When the elevator doors closed, silence filled the narrow space between them. Lena clutched her canvas bag tighter. Rowan adjusted his coat, the habit of control refusing to die. "You'll be warm in a few minutes," he said quietly. She nodded, not looking up. Her lashes were wet from melted snow. In the suite, he turned the thermostat high enough to chase the cold out of the walls. The place was vast, 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, glass windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, now blurred by snow. He set her bag on the couch. "You can shower," he said. "There are towels. The bathroom's through there." She hesitated at the threshold, uncertain whether the offer came with conditions. He softened his tone. "It's okay. You're safe here, Lena." Those words hit something in him as soon as he said them. Safe. He hadn't used that word in years, maybe decades. It didn't belong in his vocabulary anymore. While she disappeared into the bathroom, he called room service. 1 grilled cheese tomato soup and a cup of warm milk, he said. "Extra blankets." His voice sounded foreign, gentle, almost. When he hung up, he realized his hands were shaking. The sound of running water drifted through the door. It was steady, rhythmic cleansing. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the city lights distorted by snowfall. A lifetime of strategy contracts and acquisitions, and tonight he couldn't strategize his way out of a simple truth: he didn't want this night to end. The bathroom door opened a few minutes later, releasing a curl of steam and the scent of hotel soap. Lena stood there in a robe that nearly swallowed her whole, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. She looked less like a ghost now and more like a child again. "Better?" he asked. She nodded. "It's really warm. Room service arrived then." She jumped slightly at the knock, retreating behind the couch. Rowan lifted a hand to the waiter. "Just leave it there," he said. When the door closed again, he gestured toward the table. "Come eat." She moved cautiously, like she was afraid to leave wet footprints on the carpet. He noticed the small wince in her steps. Her shoes must have soaked through hours ago. Without thinking, he took a towel from the rack and knelt, drying her feet carefully. She froze, unsure what to do with kindness that asked for nothing back. "You don't have to," she murmured. "I know," he said. "But I want to." Her eyes widened a little, as if those words didn't belong to the world she knew. When she sat down, she reached for the sandwich but didn't take a bite right away. She whispered a small thank you, and then began to eat with a quiet that felt ceremonial. Halfway through, she looked up. "Will it snow all night?" "Probably," he said. "Chicago doesn't know when to quit." She smiled faintly at that. It was the first smile he'd seen on her face, and it was enough to warm something deep inside his chest. When she finished, he poured her the warm milk. "Drink slowly," he said. "It'll help you sleep." She obeyed, small hands cupped around the glass. After a moment, she spoke softly. "You didn't have to help me." He leaned back. "Maybe I did." She tilted her head. "Why?" He hesitated. No one had asked him a simple question like that in years, because sometimes, he said finally, people walk into your life and remind you what being human feels like. The words surprised even him. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if she understood something she couldn't yet name. When the clock neared midnight, he showed her the guest bedroom. "You can sleep here. The bathroom's just down the hall. If you need anything, knock 3 times. I'll know it's you." 3 knocks, she repeated carefully, committing it to memory. He smiled. "Exactly." She hesitated in the doorway. "Do I lock it if you want to?" he said. "Whatever makes you feel safe." That word again, safe. It lingered between them, unfamiliar but welcome. She closed the door halfway, leaving it open just enough for the light to spill through. Rowan sat at the dining table, hands clasped, listening to the sound of her moving around drawers, opening the soft thud of the mattress as she climbed into bed. Then the faint creak of springs went still. He poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered, like the years had finally caught up to him now that he'd stopped running from them. After a while, there was a small noise from the bedroom, a muffled whimper. He hesitated, then went to the door and knocked gently once. "Lena." No answer, just the sound of a stifled sob. He opened the door a few inches. She was sitting up, eyes wide, the blanket clutched to her chin. "Bad dream?" he asked. She nodded. It was dark again. He crouched beside the bed. "You're not there anymore," he said softly. "You're here. You're warm. And nobody's going to hurt you." Her breathing slowed. He waited until her hands stopped shaking before standing. 3 knocks, remember? She gave a tiny nod. "Good night, Lena." "Good night, Mr. Rowan." He closed the door halfway, leaving her the light. Back in the living room, he turned off the TV, the noise too empty against the quiet. He sat there until the clock read 2:00 a.m. The city still swallowed in snow. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't check his phone. Instead, he picked up a notepad from the desk the kind hotels leave beside the bed and began to write not numbers, not deals, but thoughts. Half-formed, unfamiliar human. The next morning, long before dawn, he walked to the window. Snow was still falling gentler now, like it had exhausted its rage. Behind him, a soft sound, Lena breathing evenly in her sleep. He stood there, realizing that this night had given him something he didn't know. He'd lost purpose that wasn't measured in profit. He watched the city wake under a blanket of white and knew one thing for certain. This wasn't charity. This was the beginning of a promise he hadn't yet learned how to make. By late morning, the city thawed under a weary light. The lake still looked bruised, but the wind had softened. Rowan drove north along Lakeshore Drive, the skyline cutting through the mist like a quiet promise. Lena sat in the passenger seat, small and silent, bundled in his oversized sweater. Every few seconds, she stole a glance at him as if afraid the moment might vanish. He kept the heat steady, the radio low, the silence calm. The townhouse on North State Parkway stood elegant and cold, its windows dark against the melting snow. He parked and looked at her. "This is home," he said simply. The word sounded unfamiliar in his own voice. She hesitated, then followed him to the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and polish. The art on the walls stared back in perfect stillness. For the first time, Rowan wished the house felt smaller, more alive. Mrs. Adler appeared from the kitchen, gray hair pinned neatly, hands drying on a towel. "Mr. Keats," she greeted, her gaze shifting to Lena. "And who's this?" "This is Lena Morales," Rowan said. "She'll be staying here a while." Mrs. Adler's expression softened instantly. "Welcome, sweetheart. Let's get you warm." Minutes later, Lena cupped a mug of cocoa in both hands, steam fogging her lashes. When she whispered thank you, her voice trembled, but carried weight. Upstairs, Rowan opened the guest room door. Pale walls, a clean desk, sunlight. "You can stay here," he said. And this, he placed a new sketchbook on the table for drawing. Her breath caught. "For me, for you," he said. She nodded solemnly. "I'll keep it clean. That's your choice," he replied. "It's meant to be used." The next morning, the city thawed just enough for errands. At the Harold Washington Library, sunlight poured through the tall glass ceiling. A librarian leaned over the counter. "What kind of stories do you like?" "Ones that end better than they start," Lena said softly. The woman smiled. "Then you'll do fine here." They left with 2 books, an illustrated guide to Chicago, and a slim book of poems. She carried the bag herself, proud as if she'd earned it. At the Chicago Cultural Center, a woman in paint-stained jeans handed Rowan a registration form. Saturday art classes, no grades, just paper and patience. He filled it out. When the line asked for emergency contact, he wrote his name and paused at relationship, then left it blank. Their final stop was Paws, Chicago, warm with fur and sound. A volunteer handed Lena a towel. "You can say hi, just don't tap the glass." Lena crouched beside a trembling terrier. "Hi," she whispered. "You're okay." The dog stilled tail wagging once. Rowan stood a few feet away, feeling something in his chest ease for the first time in years. Back home, the city had melted into gray twilight. Mrs. Adler ladled soup into bowls, steam curling through the air. They ate together at the kitchen island, 3 people, one small circle of warmth. Halfway through, Lena looked up. "Do you like your house?" Rowan paused. "I used to," he said. "But I think I was just living in it." She nodded. "I know what that's like." The following afternoon, they bought her a real coat and boots. The clerk zipped them up, and Lena stomped, once grinning. "They sound strong," she said. "They are," Rowan replied. "So are you." When they returned, Mrs. Adler had labeled a kitchen drawer Lena's things. Inside, crayons, notebooks, a ruler, a roll of tape. Rowan added a small brass bell to the table. "If you need me and don't want to knock," he said, "ring this." She tried it once. The delicate chime filled the house like light finding corners that had been dark for too long. That evening, Rowan tried to read emails in the study, but couldn't. The sound of Lena's pencil scratching paper floated through the hallway. He followed it to the living room. She sat cross-legged on the rug, bent over her sketchbook. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Can I show you?" She held up a drawing, 3 figures beneath a roof. A girl, a tall man, and another faint outline with wings. Above them, written in careful letters, "We're safe now." He couldn't breathe for a moment. "May I hang it?" she asked. He nodded. She taped it to the mantel with precise care. The house, which had long been elegant but empty, suddenly looked alive. His phone buzzed. An email from his PRT media request photo of you and the girl. Stories trending. He stared at it, then typed "no comment, no photos, protect her privacy," and turned the phone off. Mrs. Adler appeared carrying a lamp. "She'll need better light," she said, setting it beside the desk. Warm glow spilled across the page, softening the edges of everything. Lena numbered the first page of her sketchbook. 1. A small start, but real. Night fell quietly. Outside, the street lamps shimmered on wet pavement. Inside, the house exhaled like it had been waiting for years. The silence was no longer sterile, it was shelter. Before bed, Lena checked the tape on her drawing. "If it falls," she asked, "can we fix it?" He smiled. "We'll make it stronger next time." She nodded, satisfied, and disappeared down the hall. Upstairs, 1 lamp at a time went dark. The bell stayed on the table. The drawing stayed on the wall. And for the first time since he could remember, Rowan realized the house wasn't just standing, it was keeping watch. It had learned its purpose the same way he was learning his. It began with a knock that didn't belong. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the measured rhythm of Mrs. Adler. This one was heavy, blunt, and final. Rowan opened the door, and the cold hit him first. Then came the man, a face that carried the same bitterness as the storm outside. A thick jacket, reeking of beer, eyes sharp with accusation. "You've got my kid," he said, voice slurred but dangerous. "She's mine." Rowan didn't flinch. Behind him, Lena stood at the bottom of the stairs, clutching the railing. Her breath caught audibly. "Go upstairs," Rowan said gently, not looking back. She obeyed, though her small footsteps trembled on the steps. The man stepped closer. "You think money lets you take what isn't yours," he hissed. "You think you can buy her?" Rowan's voice came low and even. "I didn't buy her, I protected her." The man smirked. "You call stealing protection. You call neglect parenting." That landed like a slap. The man's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this. Courts don't side with men like you. Not when you steal a poor man's daughter." Rowan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was iron. The man stormed off, his curses echoing down the street. The door shut, sealing the house back into its fragile calm. Upstairs, Lena was waiting in the hallway, her hands gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles whitened. He said I was his, she whispered. "But I don't want to go." Rowan crouched down to her level. "You won't," he said quietly. "Not while I can stand." 2 days later, it wasn't fists at the door, it was lawyers, clean suits, clipped words, a summons left like a wound. The papers accused him of kidnapping, emotional manipulation, harboring a child against her guardian's will. The words were clinical, cruelly indifferent to truth. Mrs. Adler read them over his shoulder and muttered, "They'll twist the story till it screams." The following week, headlines arrived faster than snow. Billionaire accused of rescuing child without custody. Hero or hijacker, the man behind the viral story. They circled his name like vultures, pairing it with phrases like ruthless, eccentric God complex. Through it all, Lena stayed quiet. She drew more. Her sketches grew sharper, scenes of rooms with closed doors and small figures looking out windows. He noticed the details. She added a hand reaching through the light, a bird carrying a key. The courtroom was colder than he expected. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones flashing like camera traps. Inside, everything smelled of varnish and tension. The judge sat high behind the bench, tired, but not unkind. The man, Lena's father, sat across the aisle. His tie crooked, his smirk rehearsed. He looked around like he owned the place. When the hearing began, his lawyer wasted no time. Mr. Keats, a man of immense wealth, took this child without authorization, denying her father his lawful rights. Rowan's attorney, a composed woman with a voice like tempered steel, replied evenly. What this man calls abduction was an act of protection. We have evidence of neglect, abuse, and abandonment. What we're proving is not ownership, it's safety. Witnesses followed. A teacher testified that Lena hadn't attended school in months. A social worker confirmed bruises. A doctor's report noted malnutrition. Piece by piece, the puzzle of her past assembled itself in painful clarity. The father scoffed at every word, muttering under his breath, shaking his head as if defiance could rewrite reality. Then it was Rowan's turn. He stood, hand steady on the railing, eyes on the judge. "I didn't plan to find her," he said, "but I couldn't unsee her. You spend your life building things that don't matter, and then one night you meet someone who does. I'm not asking for thanks, I'm asking for her safety." The father laughed bitterly. "Safety, from what? From being poor. You think she's your redemption project?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "I think she's a child who deserves to be treated like one." The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for silence. "We'll hear from the child," he said. The bailiff opened the door. Lena stepped forward, small against the vast room, her feet barely making sound on the polished floor. She carried a folded paper, the same one she had read to Rowan weeks ago. Her voice wavered, but she began. "Dear Mommy in heaven," she said, and the words spilled into the silence. "I sleep where mops sleep. I try to be good. If God sends me a kind man, I'll tell you." She paused, then looked at Rowan. He came. "I feel safe now." No one moved. The judge's gavel lowered slightly, his hand trembling just once. Even the father, for a heartbeat, looked away. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was measured but thick. "Mr. Keats," he said, "you are not related by blood. But family is not only blood. Family is the choice to stay when others leave." He turned toward the man across the aisle. "You left your daughter in conditions no child should endure. The court recognizes neglect and grants full custody to Mr. Rowan Keats." The gavel struck once. The sound cracked the air open. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, but Rowan didn't hear them. Lena was already running toward him, her small shoes clicking against the floor. He caught her mid-step, lifting her as she whispered the only words that mattered. "We're safe now." Outside, the crowd surged. Reporters shouted questions. He ignored them, shielding her face from the lights. For once, protection wasn't about power. It was about presence. They reached the car. She held his hand tightly, her fingers fitting between his like they had always belonged there. Chicago moved past the windows in streaks of light and shadow. She leaned against him, eyes heavy with exhaustion, her small voice barely audible. "You didn't let them take me." He looked down at her and said the truth, steady and simple. "I never will." The city rolled on, unaware that inside one quiet car, something sacred had been restored, a child's faith, a man's conscience, and the understanding that no empire mattered more than a promise kept. That night, as they crossed the bridge toward home, snow began to fall again. Not a storm this time, but a benediction. It covered the city gently like mercy, remembering where to land. Morning light poured across the dining table, soft and golden. The storm was behind them, the courthouse a memory. For the first time in years, Rowan felt the silence of his home wasn't emptiness, it was peace. Lena sat across from him sketching with her usual focus, her crayon-stained fingers moving like they already knew the world they wanted to build. Mrs. Adler flipped pancakes at the stove, humming an old tune that somehow fit the morning perfectly. When Lena finished, she turned the page toward him. 3 figures heroine and a woman with wings stood under a wide sun. Above them in uneven letters she had written, "Home." Rowan's voice caught. "It's beautiful," he said. "That's us," she replied simply. "You, me, and Mommy in heaven." Mrs. Adler placed a plate in front of him, pretending not to notice his eyes glisten. "Eat before it cools," she said. The days began to form a rhythm. Breakfasts filled with laughter, afternoons of drawing, nights of stories by the fire. The townhouse, once cold and guarded, now seemed to breathe. Every room carried a trace of her pencil shavings on the table socks, left like tiny footprints of joy. 2 weeks later, Rowan walked her to school for the first time. Her new coat brushed her knees, her backpack nearly as big as she was. "What if they don't like me?" she whispered. "They will," he said, "and even if they don't, you already belong somewhere." The teacher greeted them at the door, smiling. "You must be Lena Keats," she said warmly. The name, her new name, hung in the air like a promise. Rowan stood outside longer than necessary, watching her small figure disappear into the building. He had closed billion-dollar deals, faced shareholders, outmaneuvered rivals, but nothing had ever required this kind of strength, letting her go even for a day. Back home, he found himself pacing. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the old silence. This was waiting. Mrs. Adler found him by the window. "You've changed," she said gently. Maybe, he admitted. "For the first time, it feels right." That afternoon, he ignored the calls from his board. He didn't care about the market. He cared about the drawing taped to the refrigerator, a new one Lena had made that morning before school. 3 figures again this time, holding hands beneath the words, "We're safe now." When she came home, she burst through the door with color on her hands and a story on her tongue. "We painted today," she said breathlessly. "The teacher said I used too much yellow. I told her sunshine needs space." He laughed, realizing she'd inherited more courage than he ever had. "She's not wrong," he said. "But neither are you." That night they baked cookies. Badly. Flour covered the counters, and Mrs. Adler laughed until tears formed. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. When Lena fell asleep on the couch, the firelight flickering over her face, Rowan stood watching her, realizing that peace didn't come from quiet, it came from presence. A few days later, he found her writing another letter. "For Mommy," he asked. She nodded. "And maybe for you too." She read aloud, her voice soft. "Dear Mommy in heaven, I found the kind man. He keeps the light on when I'm scared and makes me laugh even when he's tired. I think you sent him. Thank you." He didn't answer. He just put his hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into him as if that said enough. Months passed, and life unfolded gently. School days, drawing lessons, evenings at home. Rowan learned how to show up, not to meetings, but to moments. He stopped counting profits and started counting mornings. When he gave interviews, reporters tried to talk about business, but he steered every answer toward compassion. Success means nothing, he said once, if you build walls instead of homes. By spring, his townhouse no longer looked like the same place. Her laughter lingered in the hallways. A shelf of framed drawings replaced the art he once bought to impress strangers. In the center hung the first sketch, "We're safe now," preserved under glass. One night, while they sat by the fire, he asked, "What are you drawing tonight?" She smiled. A house that can fit more kids, the one still outside. That idea stayed with him. A week later, he met with his lawyer. "I want to start a foundation," he said. "Not for show. For kids like Lena kids who need someone to stay." Months later, the Keats Foundation for Children opened its doors. The media called it the Empire of Warmth. For once, the name didn't make him cringe. At the opening ceremony, he stood before the crowd, his voice steady. "I spent my life building an empire out of glass and steel," he said, "but none of it mattered until I built one out of love." In the front row, Lena beamed, her legs swinging. She mouthed the words that had bound them since the night they met. "We're safe now." That evening back home, she taped a new drawing above the mantel. Two figures stood beneath an open sun. Above them she wrote, "We help others feel safe now." Rowan looked at it for a long time. The line of her small letters was steady, confident. She wasn't just a child rescued anymore, she was a child reborn, turning her safety into a gift for others. Later that night, he stood in her doorway. She was already asleep, her breathing slow, her face peaceful. He whispered, "You saved me too." Outside, snow began to fall again, light, forgiving, gentle. In the quiet house on North State Parkway, a man who had once built his life on power now understood what true empire looked like. It wasn't made of glass or numbers or influence, it was made of warmth. The empire of warmth. It began with a bowl of noodles and ended with a home that could hold two hearts and maybe someday many more. When the last traces of snow disappeared from Chicago's streets, Rowan Keats finally understood that some storms don't end when the sky's clear. They end when the heart does. Months had passed since the night he met Lena in that small lakeside diner, shivering and asking only for a bowl of noodles. Yet the echo of that moment still lived inside him. One quiet act of compassion had undone decades of distance. The man, once known for his precision, for his ruthless control, had discovered that the truest strength comes not from dominance, but from care. His life, once measured by numbers, was now measured by moments, morning laughter, drawings taped to walls, the warmth of belonging. His townhouse, once a museum of silence, had transformed into a living thing full of light, full of story. He didn't need skyscrapers anymore to feel tall. Watching Lena learn to smile without flinching was enough. Lena's world had changed, too. The girl who once hid behind fear now stood unafraid, her sketches telling stories of healing. Where her early drawings showed cold rooms and empty windows, now there were open doors, sunlight, and wings. She had learned that love wasn't something to beg, for it was something that could be built. And in teaching her safety, Rowan found his own redemption. But what made their story extraordinary wasn't wealth or rescue, it was choice. He didn't have to stop that night. He didn't have to care, yet he did. And that single decision created ripples that would outlast them both. The lesson in their journey is one that reaches beyond the screen. Compassion changes everything. It's not the size of the gesture that matters, it's the willingness to act when no one's watching. In a world that often celebrates power, speed, and self-interest, Rowan's transformation reminds us that the greatest victories are quiet ones. The courage to show up, to listen, to protect someone who can't repay you. Maybe you've been moving too fast, caught in the same chase Rowan once lived, measuring your worth in productivity instead of presence. This story asks you to pause. Look around. Somewhere near you there's someone cold, maybe not in body but in spirit, waiting for a kind word, a moment of attention, a reminder that they matter. Kindness is not weakness, it's architecture. It builds homes, heals hearts, and gives meaning to the structures we spend our lives creating. Like Rowan, we can all choose to make warmth our legacy, because when the noise fades, when careers, titles, and possessions are gone, what remains is what we gave. So, tonight, as you close this story, ask yourself, what kind of empire am I building? Is it made of walls and numbers? Or of a people in hope? Rowan Keats learned that a single act of compassion can outshine a lifetime of ambition. And maybe that's the truth. We're all meant to rediscover that love, not power, is the only empire that lasts. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that goodness still exists, that second chances are real, then stay with us. Subscribe to our channel, leave a comment sharing what this story meant to you, and click the bell icon so you never miss our next journey. Your support helps us tell more stories that heal, that inspire, that remind the world of one simple truth. Even in the coldest night, warmth can begin with just one person choosing to stay.